I'm going to ask Emily Sussman to come up now. Emily, I got to give you a quick little aside. Emily came into the office that I've been camping in at Missouri in the fall, and she was working on a website called Carpe Media, really high-quality writing by other graduate students at Missouri and at other places around the country. And she said, you know, I listened to a talk you gave about the Information Valet project, and I realized we haven't really thought too much about how we're going to get paid for all this great content. So I said, Emily, would you do us a favor on the Information Valet project? Would you go back to the beginning of the web, the sort of beginning of the commercial web in 1994 or 1995, and survey the history of trying to get paid for content, and then pull together a report for May for a couple of people? And then I said, and by the way, here are 1,000 emails that I've collected over the last 14 years on that subject, and just read through them all and see what you can make. So I am so thankful that Emily got asked to do this instead of me. But here, so cut her some slack, but she's done a beautiful job of summarizing it.
Okay. Like Bill said, I'm Emily Sussman. I'm finishing up my master's at Missouri School of Journalism. In keeping with the theory that today's journalists have to be Renaissance men or Renaissance women, my concentration is magazine writing and new media, and now I'm going into radio production. So I'm all over the board. Anyway, so like he said, I mean, this is a very big, broad topic, and I tried to frame it, the topic of paid content, in a way that's very relevant to today. The debate that's currently going on, it's sort of the aggregators versus the newspapers, and I think there's been recent events that have really sort of delineated that. So I'll get started. This is the title. Okay. This is a timeline. It's by no means exhaustive, but it's just meant to kind of acquaint you with the major events in the evolution of paid or, as the case may be, unpaid content. So, 1995, New Century Network. I don't know how many of you remember this, but as the internet started to explode, mainstream use, a consortium of newspaper companies, including the New York Times, Gannett, Washington Post, Knight Ridder, Tribune Company, each of them kicked in about $1 million, and they knew they wanted to unite as some sort of a giant consortium of content against Microsoft, which I guess was developing its own sort of major content network at the time. Something that would provide not only news but classifieds, city guides, stuff like that. But of course, when you get a bunch of media giants together in the same room, there's bound to be disagreement. And there was. The main issue, which obviously continues today, was how to make the transition from print to digital. It took New Century Network 2 years to actually create the infrastructure for the portal to all their content. And I think it was 18 months to hire a CEO, and it was very drawn out. In the meantime, a lot of the NCN, New Century Network affiliates were sort of actually going off on their own and building their own proprietary content sites and ad networks. There was no unity, no consensus really on anything except the fact that they pulled the plug on it in 1998. And it gone. Okay. Okay, fast forward. 2003. Google introduces search-targeted advertising known as AdWords. This is a system in which, I'm sure most of you are familiar, but advertisers essentially bid on having their ads appear against certain search terms, keywords that might be relevant to their customers, thereby increasing the chances that their product is actually relevant to the consumer. They bid per click, and Google also has their magic formulas and, places them in, okay, this isn't a great graphic, but you can see on the right, I just typed in beach houses, and it not only did it give me the search results, it gave me a list of the Google ads on the side, and the one at the top, Myrtle Beach houses, they probably bid the most to have Google put per click to put them at the top of the search list. We're going to keep talking about Google here because obviously it has had a huge effect on newspapers and the whole issue of paid content. As you can see, my color scheme here is kind of Google oriented too. But first, it's important to remember Time Select. 2005, Time Select debuts, whereby a user would have to pay about $50 a year to access the Times' op-ed columnists, unless they were already a print subscriber. And exactly 2 years later, the New York Times ended this experiment. Why? There were a couple of reasons. Number one, bloggers, we're already in the 21st century. Bloggers, are commenting on news, and they were reposting the content anyway, finding ways to make it free and available for their readers. And number two, there was evidence that they were losing eyeballs. The New York Times, decided that the amount of people that they were losing by putting up that paywall wasn't worth the ad revenue that they could make up, if they had all of those free users. And even the columnists themselves objected to Time Select, saying that it cut them off from the flow of information on the net and cut them off from their audiences. Okay, I'm going to skip back to 2006, back to Google News, when we start to see the really mainstream, widespread use of news aggregators. There's, strictly aggregator sites like Google News. There's hybrid sites like the Huffington Post is an example. They have original content and they aggregate content from, the AP and so on and so forth. And here's an example of Google News. You can customize it. I haven't done so in this case, but if I'm interested in just sports, I can have it, bring up just sports events. If I only trust a couple of news sources, I can tell it that I only want it to rely on those. So it's very customizable. In keeping with Google's philosophy of having everything be user-centric, it's totally user-centric, and I think that's an important point. But there were some problems with Google News. 2005, Google was sued by France's version of the AP for $15 million. They were accusing Google of cutting into their circulation and violating copyrights and so on and so forth. So in 2000, so we see Google News actually signing a formal agreement, licensing agreement, in 2006 with the AP, saying we can, reprint or repost, X amount of content. Meanwhile, over at the Wall Street Journal, they were having a nice time charging people for their content the whole time. And by 2007, 1 million subscribers at about $120 a year to its paid web edition. I mean, you do the math, that's a good chunk of revenue there. And, a lot of people say, well, part of that can be attributed to the fact that a lot of people write off the Wall Street Journal as a business expense and, they're not really paying for it out of their pocket, which could be true, but you got to give them credit for having been there from the get-go, and now their users are totally trained to pay. And it's true that you can get Wall Street Journal content other ways on the web. You can search for it, you can link to it. It's very easy to get it in sort of a disparate way. But if you pay for it, you get it all in a very nice, organized, beautiful, well-designed package. And for a lot of people, time is money, and I don't want to go searching around for, the journal's media coverage. I want it all on one page, so it's worth it to me. That's what I kind of call a value-added proposition, something I'm willing to pay for. Okay, 2009, last month. I'm not sure how many of you remember this, but it was pretty remarkable. AP Chair Dean Singleton was giving a speech at, I think it was the AP annual conference, and he was, addressing the crisis in journalism and, declining revenue or collapsing revenue. And he basically said, to news aggregators, which had been selling advertising against their content, essentially, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. If you've seen the movie Network, Howard Beale says that, and it's sort of a real, it was a real call to arms, I thought. And we can see sort of an example of this, what he was talking about. This is a site called newser.com. It was started by Michael Wolff, who is still a columnist, I guess, for Vanity Fair. And the motto of Newser is read less, no more. And that's sort of, in keeping with today's, hyper short attention spans on the web. But what they do is they attribute, an article to its original source. Like in this case, I guess it was the AP. They include direct links to whatever site they've called from, but they sort of make up their own snappy little summary and say, well, that's our original content, and we're linking, so it's fair use. But, people like Dean Singleton are calling them parasites, which in their view, they most certainly are. So Journalism Online LLC, I was really glad to see that Meryl Brown was here this morning, because I'm really interested in that concept of, I'm sure it's going to be much different from New Century Network in terms of, they're going to learn from past lessons, but it's a broad effort to unite finally content providers, saying we're not going to take it anymore. We're going to unite. We're going to charge. This is press release on their homepage. Obviously, they're fledgling. They're in talks with a lot of publishers to go on board. So we'll see how that turns out. Which brings us to today. Just a couple weeks ago, Congress had a hearing on the future of journalism, and there were a number of very diverse viewpoints expressed there. There was Arianna Huffington, Google's Marissa Mayer, David Simon, the creator of The Wire, and former Baltimore Sun reporter, Steve Call and James Maroney of The Washington Post and Dallas Morning News, basically all giving different opinions of why newspapers' revenues are collapsing and they're going out of business. Someone like Arianna Huffington obviously is saying, the web wants to be free. We're going to keep providing, these links and aggregating for free. You can make it up in ad revenue. And David Simon actually, I think, was the one who came out the strongest against these parasites. So that was interesting. Okay. And just a couple weeks ago, too, the New York Times announced that after a lot of speculation and continued speculation, that it will have a paid content plan in place by the end of next month. Either a metering system, they weren't specific about how each of these would actually work, but a metering system whereby you read 5 articles for free, let's say, and then the next, then after that you start getting charged for them. or the other option, they're thinking about memberships, whereby, if you sign up and pay the New York Times, they give you access to, various extra features and, sort of the Kachingle, Cynthia was talking about, model of, people feeling good about giving to, media that they really value. The NPR model, essentially. So today, we could go in a lot of different directions. We could see sites like Newser. Michael Wolff says, will say flat out that he's determined to, take over media, and he's determined to, revolutionize the way people consume media on the web, and that it will remain free and no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And then you have people like, the AP really getting tough and saying we're actually going to seek out people who are organizations that aggregate our content in a view that we think is parasitic. But there are a few. To say a few is an understatement, but there are a few problems with putting up paywalls, charging for content, news content. First is the eyeball factor. Like I said in the Time Select example, when you put up a paywall, you lose people. And if you want multiple revenue streams, you want advertising in addition to your paywall subscriber fees. That advertising isn't really going to happen if you have a incredibly diminished number of people looking at it. The leakage factor, bloggers, and just generally web-savvy people in general know how to get around paywalls, and a lot of them take pride, and people in my generation especially take pride in distributing content for free, and saying, "Haha, let's stick it to the man," and really getting around it that way, giving it to their friends. The Gen Y factor kind of goes along with that. Just the attitude, people in their teens and 20s, especially now, that information should be free. Quite literally, like a lot of us were raised on the internet in its current incarnation, and we haven't been charged. And we do have an incredible appetite for news, but we don't want to pay for it. Part of it is practical. A lot of us don't have a whole lot of money, and part of it is really ideological. And then there's the headache factor, which I think Cynthia referred to as mental transaction costs. You don't constantly, as a consumer of news, you don't constantly want to be thinking about, oh, have I paid my subscription to this? Are they charging me for this page or that page? How long am I spending on, in order to not get charged? So on and so forth. But the biggest problem, obviously, is the post-scarcity economy. And I'm going to sort of give a lot of credit here to Jeff Jarvis, who is a very well-known media blogger, and I guess he's a professor now at CUNY. And he just came out with a book called "What Would Google Do?" And which is a pretty fitting question, seeing as they had revenues of $22 billion last year, and newspaper companies didn't. So sort of patterning, applying Google's sort of revolutionary business ideas to business in general, the future of business in general. And he refers to the post-scarcity economy. And in the web, obviously, it doesn't cost anything to make a digital copy. It's hard to convince people to pay for something when they know that it's just as easy for you to give it away. You're not even creating a product on paper. It's literally doesn't cost anything. And I'm going to read this quote from a blog post that Jarvis put up in August of 2005. "There's no scarcity of good stuff, and when there's no scarcity, the value of owning a once scarce commodity diminishes and then disappears. In fact, it's worse than that. Owning the content factory only means that you have higher costs than the next guy. You own the high-priced talent or infrastructure, while your new competitor owns just her own talent and a PC. I think that sums it up pretty well. There are going to be consortiums forming, again, Journalism Online LLC, and the Media News Group which has, I think, 50 or 60 papers, is going to start charging. Mobile formatted news, this is a huge area for potential paid content. People are increasingly relying on their mobile devices for information, and why not, throw in a little, application charge for that. The New York Times, as we saw, and Rupert Murdoch is now threatening to make all of his publications, not just the Wall Street Journal, paid. And how a lot of different techniques, voluntary memberships, sort of the NPR model, value-added subscriptions, whereby you'd get something extra in addition to the satisfaction of paying, mobile app fees, metering, and a la carte. What's not scarce? These are what I think of as the things that people will be willing to shell out for. They don't have a lot of time, so they want information and news in a very accessible manner. They don't want to have to go really searching for it. If there was a really powerful, site or service or network that allowed them to get everything and constantly updated that was exactly relevant to them, I think that would be a huge value-added proposition. Relevance kind of goes along with that. And sort of this idea of community, too. Again, what Cynthia was talking about, the idea of supporting an institution that you really value being a kind of status symbol, people putting it up on their Facebook pages or something like that. I subscribe to the New Republic, and, that tells people who look at my profile not only that, what my politics are maybe, but the fact that I'm, supporting this type of media and so on and so forth. And this, I'm just going to run through a few examples. Voluntary subscriptions. This is the Mother Jones website. As you can see in the top right, they have a little box, reader-supported journalism. We rely on you. And they're offering subscriptions. But it's a very direct plea, saying, look, if you want this, you guys maybe should think about supporting us. And a la carte, again, this is an academic journal, as you can see on the right. You can purchase it for $10. And this is an example from my iPhone. Just typing in news applications and searching through them. A lot of them increasingly are paid applications. This one, for example, you can get all of the latest Army news for a one-time fee of $1.99. But you can imagine that, a lot of $1.99s add up. So that's a huge revenue stream. And value-added subscriptions. If you subscribe to Harper's Magazine in print, you also have access to the entire archive of Harper's articles, going back to whatever, the 1800s. Or staying free, like I said, there are a lot of organizations, a lot of sites that are very steadfast in saying, we want to keep everything free for the consumer, for the user. The user-centric experience must be free. And we see that in the form of most consumer magazines have really no plans to charge. Most blogs, obviously the aggregators, Google News, Huffington Post, Drudge, and public media, where it's always been the case that that payment has not been required, but definitely heavily suggested. And a good example of the part of the sort of problem that is going on, or cognitive dissonance, or whatever. In preparing this presentation, I talked to Chris Anderson, who's the editor of Wired magazine, And he was very, very adamant, saying magazines are fine. Magazines are fine. We're getting everything from ad revenue. Nothing has changed. You know, we're fine. We're fine. We're fine. And then lo and behold, a couple days later, I find this article in the New York Times saying how, you know, basically the problem that Wired is facing, that even though they're a phenomenal product and they've been getting all these awards and so on and so forth, they're facing a really steep decline in ad revenue. So we'll see if publications like Wired go to paid content. It's really very unclear now, but they a lot of them have not expressed any direction in that point. I don't think we have time, but I had a quick video of Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, sort of explaining what he said to, I think he said to the Newspaper Association conference last month, that newspapers really have to innovate their advertising products and their platforms in order to keep the user experience a pleasant one, a free one, hopefully. And, you know, it's Google very much doesn't want to be seen as the bad guy who steals all the revenue. They want to see themselves as collaborators, or they want to be collaborators with newspapers. To, you know, they're saying, we're not going to give you guys money. You know, we're not going to hand over our profits. But if we can help in any way, you know, technologically innovate your products, then we will. A lot of the sources I relied on for all the research I did, everyone from bloggers to newspaper columnists to CEOs. So I think I got a pretty comprehensive view on the topic. And just leave you with a quote here. Dan Kennedy, I think he's the media critic for The Guardian in London. The goal isn't the survival of an industry, it's an informed citizenry. So that's something, I guess, to keep in mind as we enter this new era of paid or unpaid content. That's it.
Thanks, Emily. You're somebody who's just coming out of the mill. Do you have a sense of optimism or pessimism about how you're going to get your blog paid for as we started?
I am 100% optimistic. I would be 200% optimistic if that made sense. I actually have an internship this summer in satellite radio, which a lot of people would say is the most doomed industry ever. But I'm convinced that with the right marketing scheme and with the development of mobile applications, it's going to be a stronger industry than ever, and they are going to get more revenue than ever. And I mean, I have to be optimistic. I mean, I have to. And part of the challenge of being a journalist today is being entrepreneurial. There's no way around it. There's just no way around it. And you've got to have really solid computer and new media skills.
Any other quick questions for Emily before we move on? Thanks.